When you build a web page, it's kind of like building a house. You first put up the structure, the walls, the windows, the doors. That's your HTML. Then you want the walls to have colors, the windows to have borders. Basically, you want your house to look good. That's where CSS comes in. CSS is like the paint, decorations, and all the style work you do to make your house beautiful. CSS works like giving instructions like make all the walls blue or make all the paragraphs green. In CSS, we write these instructions as something called a CSS rule. It has two main parts: a selector to select what you want to style and a declaration to declare how you want it to look. This is like saying, hey browser, select every paragraph on the page and make the text green. Here P is the selector, it tells CSS what to style, and the part inside the curly braces is the declaration. It says how to style it. You can style just one element, multiple elements, or very specific parts of your web page, all using different kind of selectors. We saw how to style all paragraphs on a page using the P selector. That's called a type selector because it selects all elements of that type. In this case, all paragraphs. But sometimes we don't want to style every element of a type. Maybe you have 10 P elements on your page, but only want 2 of them to be green. That's where class selectors come in. Class selectors are like giving specific elements a nickname or class, so you can style them individually or in groups without affecting everything else of the same type. First, in your HTML, you add a class attribute to the elements you want to style specifically. For example, here I have added the class highlight to 2 of the paragraphs. Now in CSS, I can write a dot followed by the class name and the declaration. This will make all elements with the class highlight green, while leaving the other paragraphs unchanged. We use the dot before the class name in CSS, but there is no dot in the HTML. The dot in CSS is a special character that indicates the class selector, distinguishing it from other selector types like type selectors or ID selectors. Here's something cool. You can give an element multiple classes and style them separately. Our dot highlight selector will still match this paragraph even though it has other classes too. Or if you want to apply a style only when both classes are present together, you can do this. See how I wrote dot highlight dot important with no space between them? This rule will only apply if the element has both highlight and important classes. So this HTML would match, but this wouldn't match. This is incredibly useful for building flexible components. Let's take buttons as an example. Here, we have a base button style and then we create variations using extra classes like primary, secondary or large. Now I can mix and match these classes to create exactly the button I need. Primary and large, secondary and large, or just primary. Each combination works perfectly. This saves us from writing separate CSS rules for every possible button variation. Instead of .primary large button, .secondary small button and dozens of other classes, we just combine the pieces we need. This is the real power of combining classes. Now, here's a common question. Are CSS class selectors case sensitive? In short, yes. When you are working with HTML, class names are case sensitive. The browser checks your HTML class names exactly as you wrote them. That means these 3 are completely different classes. But here's why people get confused. Technically, the CSS language itself doesn't care about case. But when it comes to matching your selectors with the actual HTML, the browser follows HTML's rules. And in HTML, class values are case sensitive. Most developers use lowercase with hyphens for class names to avoid any confusion. This way, you never have to worry about case sensitivity issues messing up your styling. Now, what if you write a class name like this or this? Technically, this is allowed in HTML, but in CSS, selectors that start with a number or contain special characters like question marks or exclamation points are invalid. The browser will simply ignore the invalid selector. No error, no styling, just nothing happens. But if you absolutely need to use numbers at the start or special characters, you can escape them with a backslash. The backslash before the question mark tells CSS to treat it as a normal character. For example, a class like this would need to be escaped as like this in CSS. And for this, \31 is the Unicode escape for the digit 1, which here escapes the number 1. And the space tells CSS where the number ends. It's a bit odd, but it works. But honestly, it's way easier to just stick to letters, numbers, not at the start, hyphens and underscores. Similar to class selectors, ID selectors let you target specific elements on your page. But there's one crucial difference. While you can give multiple elements the same class, an ID must be unique. Think of it like a passport number. Each person has a unique one, no two are the same. In your HTML, you add an ID attribute to an element like this. And in CSS, you use a hash symbol followed by the ID name. Just like class selectors use a dot, ID selectors use the hash symbol to tell CSS what you are targeting. IDs have more styling power, what we call high specificity. This means that if you style the same element with both a class and an ID, the ID styles will usually win. We talked about classes being reusable. You can apply the same class to multiple elements across your site. But IDs are different. They are meant to be unique, so only one element per page should have a specific ID. This makes them less flexible for styling. Imagine you style a button using an ID. Now, what if you need another button that looks the same? You can't reuse that ID. You would have to create a whole new ID with the same styles, which isn't very efficient. So you might be thinking, if classes can do the same job and are more flexible, why do IDs exist at all? Before I show you some examples, don't worry if you don't understand everything I'm about to mention. You are not expected to know these yet. I'm just showing them so you see the bigger picture of what IDs can do beyond styling. IDs are primarily used for three main purposes. First, JavaScript. When you are writing JavaScript to interact with your web page, IDs are perfect because they guarantee you are targeting exactly one element. Second, anchor links. You can link directly to a specific section of your page using IDs. And third, form labels. Labels can be associated with form inputs using IDs. But for general CSS styling, classes are almost always the better choice because they are reusable and more maintainable. Now, just like with classes, ID names are case sensitive and follow the same naming rules we discussed earlier. You can't start with a number, and it's best to stick with letters, hyphens, and underscores to avoid any issues. What happens if you accidentally use the same ID twice? This breaks the one ID per page rule. Your CSS might still work and style both elements, but it's invalid HTML. Think of it like two people having the same passport number. Total chaos at the airport. The browser won't show an error, but other parts of your site might behave unpredictably. So always keep your IDs unique. One per page, no exceptions. Now that we have learned about type selectors, class selectors, and ID selectors, let's talk about something that will make your CSS writing much more efficient. Selector lists. Instead of writing separate rules for elements that need the same styling, you can group them together. Let's say you want all your headings H1, H2 and H3 to have the same blue color. Without selector lists, you would write this. That's a lot of repetition. With selector lists, you can combine them using commas. The comma is like saying AND. So this reads as H1 and H2 and H3 should all be blue. You can mix and match any type of selector in a list. Want to style some paragraphs, a specific class and an ID all at once? You can do this. This rule says make all paragraphs anything with the highlight class and the element with ID special text bold. You can also combine class selectors in your list. Remember how we learned about multiple classes? You can include those combinations in selector lists. This styles buttons that have primary class, buttons with secondary class, and any element with the link class. Spaces around commas don't matter in selector lists, but consistency helps readability. But most developers use the second format, a comma followed by a space, because it's the most readable. And when you have a long selector list, you can put each selector on its own line. This way, it's easy to scan and see exactly what's being styled. Now, here's a mistake to watch out for. Look at this rule. At first glance, it looks like this will color all H1 headings, every element with the sidebar class, and all paragraphs blue. But actually, that's not what's happening. That space between .sidebar and P has a special meaning in CSS. It means select paragraphs that are inside elements with the sidebar class. So this rule really applies to all H1 headings and all paragraphs that are inside elements with the sidebar class. So if you actually wanted to target all H1s, all elements with the sidebar class and all paragraphs, you need commas. Now, you might be wondering, if a space changes the meaning, are there other symbols like this in CSS? Yes, CSS has some real interesting ones like space, plus, tilde and greater than. These are called combinators and they let you combine selectors in powerful ways. We will explore them in detail in an upcoming video with some cool practical use cases. Now, here's a crucial thing to remember. If even one selector in your list is invalid, the entire rule gets ignored by the browser. None of your headings will turn blue, even though H1, H2 and H3 are perfectly valid selectors. This is different from what happens with individual CSS selectors. If you have an invalid selector, the browser just ignores that one selector but keeps the rest. But with selector lists, one invalid selector breaks the whole list. It's like having one bad apple that spoils the whole bunch. So far, we have learned how to select specific elements, group of elements using classes, unique elements with IDs, and how to group multiple selectors using selector lists. But what if you want to select every element on your web page at once? That's where the Universal Selector comes in. It's written with just a star symbol or the asterisk. So when I write this rule, it's like telling the browser, hey, select every element type and make them all blue. The most common way developers actually use the Universal Selector is for something called a CSS reset. Every browser gives elements some default styling, like margins and padding. These built-in styles are called user agent styles, and the problem is they are not the same in every browser. This rule that developers commonly use removes that default spacing from every element, giving you a clean slate to work with. Now, even though the Universal Selector affects everything, it has the lowest styling power. Remember how we talked about IDs having more power than classes when there's a conflict? If a rule with a Universal Selector says one thing, but the one with a class selector or ID selector says something else, the others will win. And that's usually what we want, because the Universal Selector is just a starting point, not the final word. Okay, let's look at a really interesting use case. Earlier in the video when we saw this rule, I told you that the space between dot sidebar and p has a special meaning. It selects paragraphs that are inside elements with the sidebar class. That space is called the Descendant combinator. It combines selectors to target elements that are nested inside other elements. Don't worry, combinators are a topic for another video. Here's where the Universal Selector gets fun. We can combine it with that same space. This reads as select every element that's inside a paragraph. So if your paragraph has a bold tag, a link or a span, all of them will turn red, but the paragraph itself won't. And this is just scratching the surface. In upcoming videos on combinators and on pseudo classes and pseudo elements, we will see some super interesting ways to combine the Universal Selector for powerful results. Let me show you two more practical uses of the Universal Selector that developers often use. First, debugging layouts. This rule gives every element on your page a red outline, so you can literally see the boundaries of every element on your page. Super helpful for spotting layout issues. Second, CSS reset with box sizing. This rule changes the way widths and heights are calculated, so they include padding and borders. This reset is so useful and powerful that February 1st is actually recognized as the International Box Sizing Awareness Day. Don't worry if you don't fully understand what these mean right now. These are connected to something called the CSS box model. Before you can truly appreciate resets like box sizing, border box, you need to understand what margin, padding and border are, what box sizing actually controls, and how elements behave as inline block or inline block. Even if you haven't ever heard of these terms, this video breaks down these concepts step by step. Once you understand the box model, CSS will start making so much more sense.